So it's great to have everybody back this morning. I know a few people were out sort of late. I think I saw people in the bar still at like 11 o'clock last night. And it's especially nice to have this session, which I think should be really one of the very best that we've done in the history of Brussels Forum. I'm really pleased to introduce the Foreign Minister of Russia, along with Javier Solana, and Philip Stevens is going to lead the discussion. It should be a very, very lively discussion, and we're looking forward to audience participation. Philip, the show's yours.
Thank you very much, Craig. My name's, as Craig said, Philip Stevens. I write for the Financial Times, and I'm going to moderate this session. I think it's called A Conversation with Russia. I think we're incredibly lucky to have two of the most experienced practitioners of foreign policy with us. We know that, and we heard yesterday that pressing the reset button's already entered the lexicon of diplomacy. What I hope we're going to discover this morning is what it means. The differences and the challenges, after all, are much the same as they were a month or two ago. And thinking about this session earlier this morning, I was reminded of a story that's told about Albert Einstein. And one summer, a group of students came to Einstein's office and with a complaint. What they said was that the examination questions that they'd been set were precisely the same questions they'd been set the previous year. How'd that happen? And Einstein smiled and said, well, of course the questions are the same, but the answers are different this year. So that's what I hope we'll discover this morning, whether the answers, the challenges, the questions are the same, but I hope we'll discover whether the answers are different. There's a lot of ground to cover. There are lots of issues, from nuclear proliferation to NATO, to the Caucasus, to Iran, to energy security. But I'm going to start with a question to each of our guests. I'm hoping they're going to keep their initial responses quite short, not too short, but quite short. Someone shouts in my ear if things go on for too long. And I'm going to start with a question to Mr. Lavrov, and it's this. We've heard recently from the Russian president that Russia wants a new set of security arrangements for Europe. A lot of the reaction in Europe to that has been, one, what does it mean? There hasn't been enough detail. And two, is this another Russian way of trying to detach us from NATO? I wonder, Mr. Lavrov, whether you'd explain to us what the plan is and how it fits with the architecture, the security architecture we already have.
Thank you very much. And this is certainly a new question. And do we feel secure in Euro-Atlantic? Yes, we have organizations, several of them. We have the political commitments. We have the principles enshrined in OSCE documents, in Russian NATO Council documents. The principles related to indivisibility of security are most important ones. And of course, not to mention territorial integrity, sovereignty. No one challenges these principles. But some of them, especially those related to hard security, are existing in the form of political commitments. And it seems that they don't work. They haven't been working for quite a long period of time, starting with the demise of the Soviet Union, when the deals, political commitments, were about, first, not to expand NATO. Then, when NATO was eventually expanded for the first time. There was a deal not to put any substantial combat forces on the territory of new members. This was also not delivered. Then there were assurances that we will expand NATO to embrace countries of Eastern Europe, the Baltic states, and don't you worry, this would solidify the security. These countries who have understandable fears and historical memory, they would be safe inside NATO and they would come down. None of this happened. The principle of indivisibility of security says that no country should ensure its security at the expense of security of others. It has been adopted at the top level in OSCE, in Russian NATO Council, and we just don't see it being used in practice. I wouldn't mention, military bases which are moved very close to the Russian territory. I wouldn't mention missile defense. You know all this. So what we suggest is to get together and to make these principles legally binding. If we still confirm these principles, because about 1 month ago in Bucharest at the Russian-NATO summit, we wanted to adopt a joint declaration. And the declaration was not flying because we could not agree on quoting the Russian NATO Council original document saying that no one should ensure his security at the expense of security of others. This quote was not possible to be reproduced last April. Of course, we have questions. Why so? So we just want to check whether the principles endorsed regarding military and political security, whether they are still valid for all members of the Euro-Atlantic space, and if so, why not making them legally binding? Plus, we want in this new exercise and the new treaty to agree on criteria to resolve conflicts, so that we don't have one standard for Kosovo and another standard for everything else. It should be also mentioned that arms control is in crisis. CFE, adapted CFE, has not been ratified by our NATO colleagues for absolutely unrelated pretexts. Again, trying to mix the legally binding CFE with political commitments. Then, when even these political commitments, which are known as the Istanbul commitments, have been implemented by Russia, new interpretation of what should be done for NATO to ratify the adapted CFE treaty were introduced. So we also want in this exercise to agree on principles of arms control and make them legally binding. This is not to substitute for efforts to revive CFE regime. But we want these efforts on CFE, but by the way, not to be limited to Russia-American dialogue. We want Europeans, because after all it's about conventional forces in Europe. We want the Europeans to be actively involved, and in this context we welcome the initiative by Frank-Walter Steinmeier to convene a meeting of experts in June in Germany. So it's indivisibility of security being codified. It's also about mechanisms which should be employed when any participant of this arrangement feels insecure. It's also about criteria to resolve conflicts. It's about arms control principles. And of course, in the new treaty proposed by us, we could also reflect a new quality of cooperation in counterterrorism, non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and other threats and challenges which we all face today. Why not do this in the existing structures? The answer is very simple. NATO looks after the security of its own members. Collective Security Treaty Organization looks after the security of its own membership. CIS, European Union with European security and defense policy. They're all about security of clubs or organizations. OSCE is a universal organization, and OSCE principles are not challenged by anyone, including Russia. But OSCE has been neglecting hard security issues for a very long period of time. It has Security Forum, it has European Security Conference, where things are supposed to be discussed, but they are not moving anywhere. And we want to change this situation. We want to use OSCE, and I think I would be coming to Vienna for European Security Conference last week of June. But OSCE has been really neglecting these issues. The second problem with OSCE is that it embraces countries, but it does not embrace organizations. And we believe that the new treaty must be negotiated by all member states, plus all the organizations active in the security area. Last point about legal obligations and legally binding commitments. OSCE is not a legally binding organization. It has political commitments. Russia-NATO Council only has political commitments, not legally binding obligations. NATO has legally binding obligations. It, creates different levels of security. So basically, this is the thinking behind our idea.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lavrov. A single playing field for European security, legally binding principles, pushing forward with arms control. That's quite an agenda. I'm going to turn to Javier Solana. He may want to comment on those, or he may want to, I suspect, also talk about the priorities that, from the Western European side, we see in this, hopefully, new relationship with Russia.
Well, of course, Javier speaks not only for Western Europe, but for the almost entire Europe, right?
Western, Central, and Eastern.
Thank you very much. Let me start again by congratulating you. I know your birthday. It's a very good starting point. Congratulations, have a happy day, and happy new birthday. Sergei, I listened with great attention what you have said. I know, because it's not the first time that I have listened to you, what is you are thinking. Let me be very briefly the first intervention. For me, for us, the security in Europe has schemes, has organizations, has a structure that are working properly. For me, there is not a big need or important need now to put aside down the structure of security in Europe. That is the first statement I would like to say. Second, the security of Europe, it was a very intelligent establishment set up. In the years, several years ago, many years ago, we started constructing in Europe a comprehensive structure of security. Comprehensive means that we have three baskets: hard security, the economics, and the human rights, which for us was very important. Remember that this was done in the 1970s. Today, in very few places in the world, you can have a structure of security as comprehensive as the one we constructed in the 70s. That has worked, for us has worked right. And the other thing that I would like to say is that three basic pillars construct this security: the Europeans, the Russian Federation today, and the United States. Now, if there is somebody of these three basic pillars that doesn't feel comfortable, he has the right to say it. And what the Russian Federation is saying today is that they don't feel comfortable in this scheme. And I think the Americans and the Europeans are ready to get engaged with the Russian Federation to see how we can solve this situation to make you comfortable. But I'd like to say that whatever we do has to be done with this spirit. Three baskets: hard security, economy, human rights, and we have room to move in that direction in the three, but not in one only, on the three. And I hope very much that we will be able, in the coming period of time, to get engaged with the Russian Federation and try to find a manner in which, or whereby, you feel more comfortable in a scheme that is in the interest of everybody, that everybody feels comfortable. Russian Federation, the Europeans, and the Americans. And this is what we are ready to do. We are ready to get engaged. We would like very much to do it in the context of the OSCE. It's the global organization in which everybody is present. And I hope very much we will be able to do it. Now, as far as legally binding, I mean, to really get engaged now, and the renewal of a treaty that will be legally binding will take enormous amount of time. And I think what we have to do is to begin working, to begin moving in the right direction, and try to see how we go at the very end of the process. But to begin thinking that we have to start working on a treaty at the very beginning, I think is a mistake from the manner in which we want to work and to make progress. Therefore, first, we feel comfortable. We don't need a change. If somebody needs a change, we are willing to get engaged. And in any case, we would like to do it with the organizations that are present now in the scheme and with the 3 levels or 3 baskets in which we have been working so happily in the past.
Just briefly, can I just one remark? Javier, about OSCE being the place, you didn't respond to my point that we want not only OSCE but also security organizations in this space to be present. Number 2, on 3 dimensions, and that you can only move with all 3 dimensions being considered in a package. No one challenges humanitarian basket of OSCE, economic basket of OSCE. Humanitarian part of OSCE has its own mechanisms which work and which produce results, painfully sometimes, but they do work. In the hard security area, there is total 0. And by the way, about the linkages between hard security and soft security, when missile defense has been negotiated for Europe, has anyone linked this with human rights or democracy? When military bases were created in Romania and Bulgaria, what was the linkage with the 3rd basket? So let's just try to understand that there is a real failure in the hard security area, and we want to fix it without challenging the comprehensive approach to security. But let's just remove this disbalance.
Okay. Now, I'm going to, before, Javier, I'll come back to you in a moment, because I really, this is the audience's conversation. So
I mean, we can go and
with you both. And I'm going to take some comments, questions from the audience. A lot of people here I know, some I don't. So because I'm a European, I'm going to be egalitarian and pretend I don't know anyone. But let's take, I just wondered whether there was someone from the United States who I could sort of encourage to make this a 3-pronged conversation at the beginning. But am I seeing anyone? Yeah, here.
Hi, Ann Applebaum from the Washington Post. I have one comment and one question. Mr. Lavrov, you said in your introduction that there had been some agreements in 1989 or 1991 at the time of the breakup of the Soviet Union, and one of them was not to expand NATO, and the other one was to have not to have any U.S. or Western military forces in any ex-Warsaw Pact countries. First of all, I'm not aware that there were any such agreements made. Perhaps they were oral. And second, what are the? I'm not aware of there being any U.S. or Western military forces in any ex-Warsaw Pact countries. My question for you is this: in what way does NATO now threaten Russia? You made it very clear that you would prefer to substitute the OSCE for NATO. Why is that? How and in what way does NATO threaten Russia? Thank you very much.
I'm going to take one more person just to sort of, before coming back to you, the gentleman here in the front, and then if we could package those two together.
I'm a European, a member of Parliament of Germany. Question to both of you. Obama and your President Medvedev are going to have a first chat in, under NATO. And what do you expect? Is there at first an attempt and a new idea in order to open up the disarmament concept, arms control? And if so, is there then the possibility to open up new chapters in the relationship between Russia and NATO?
Fine, so two strong questions. Javier has a right of reply, though, as well, because I cut him short, so I'm going to start with Javier and then...
I'm sorry, my temptation is to respond to the question posed to him. And, now, on the two issues. First, I think I have I wouldn't say a privileged part of this history, but I have had a relevant part of this history. I like to say very clearly that the first enlargement of NATO, prior to that, in a very intelligent decision by NATO, we started a bilateral negotiation between Russia and NATO. You remember. That ended up with the Founding Act, and that was negotiated on behalf of NATO by myself, and on behalf of the Russian Federation by, at the time, Mr. Primakov. It was not easy, but I think it was a very, very good idea to do it. I think we ended up with a good scheme that allowed NATO and the Russian Federation to get together and discuss all the issues that were of the interest of both one organization and one country. I have to tell you that there still is a tremendous amount of room to do that better. It's a tremendous amount of space to get that NATO-Russia Council to do much better than it has done so far. First thing. And it is true that in that agreement, some of the issues that came posed to Sergei were there. If you read again the Founding Act, it's a lot of things which are there that I wouldn't say we have forgotten, but we have not complied 100%. I like to say that and none of the truth. The second thing, I think that on the new summit that will take place in London between President Obama and President Medvedev, I hope very much that the issues which are of great interest for all of us, disarmament, nuclear disarmament in particular, which during 8 years have been more or less paralyzed. The START treaties are coming to an end in the year 2009. I think will be a very important moment to recuperate that spirit of treaties on the nuclear matters. I think that the meeting that took place in Geneva not long ago between the Secretary of State and Sergei Lavrov, from the information that I've got, I think was a constructive meeting, a positive meeting that may, I think, prepare the ground for a good summit in London.
Just, Foreign Minister, I just want to put one observation into this. I don't think, having listened to quite a lot of conversations, that people are ever going to agree on the history of the 90s and who actually promised what and whatever. And it sort of seems to me that sometimes, but I'll put this to you, add to the questions.
Deprive me of answering.
Maybe, it's time to sort of put the history aside and move forward.
The question was asked, and I would say yes. Yes, unfortunately, those were oral promises and commitments, but very firm oral promises. And basically, I think we were naive. Those who were taking those promises were naive. I've read the transcripts of the top-level negotiations. I know what I'm talking about. And the naive approach was based on the conviction that after the Soviet Union, there is a new, the end of history, and everyone is going to be brother and sister. It didn't happen. But yes, those were oral commitments. On the presence of the United States military forces out in Eastern Europe, the two military bases are being built, created in Romania and Bulgaria, and this is a factual thing. It's not oral, it's material. About NATO threatening Russia, it's not just threatening Russia. NATO is an organization which is reality. We want, and Javier mentioned about the arrangements which were reached in the 90s between Russia and NATO. The arrangements, by the way, was that Russia-NATO Council is not 26 plus 1, it's 27, and each country should participate in its national capacity. Of course, it never worked in practice, which is another problem which we have. NATO, we consider NATO as a reality. We want to cooperate with it. We see potential for this cooperation. Afghanistan, joint control of the airspace, quite a number of things, compatibility of peacekeeping forces, a lot. But we also don't like that NATO takes it upon itself to judge everyone and everything. And NATO, NATO bombed Yugoslavia without any legal justification, without okay from the Security Council in violation of the UN Charter. The recent discussions on new NATO strategy or doctrine, I don't know how it is really called.
I'm not sure they do either.
It's an open material. They include in this doctrine more and more scenarios where force could be used, not necessarily with the sanction of the Security Council. This bothers us because we indeed believe that international law should be universally applied and there should be no privileged security areas. We just don't understand why NATO is expanding. We don't understand why this military infrastructure is being moved to our borders. Missile defense is a separate issue. We have been, during last years, quietly reducing our military presence in Kaliningrad area. And we would be having third positioning area of the US global missile defense. Of course, this could not be taken easily, especially since this third positioning area would be seeing the strategic forces located in the Russian territory. And of course, we don't understand why NATO is indeed, or some members of NATO, are pushing Ukraine into NATO when 18% of the Ukrainian population only believe they should join NATO. And why NATO is still saying that Georgia must be a member of NATO when the current regime in Georgia used brutal force against all its international obligations. My very last point, I think that, frankly, I don't want to make it a secret, when before Mr. Saakashvili gave orders to attack South Ossetia, we have been talking very intensely with Condi Rice. And I was making the point repeatedly that why don't you persuade them to sign a non-use of force agreement? Why don't you stop providing them with offensive arms? And she told me, don't you worry. And I also said, why are you pulling them into NATO with all this? And she said, don't you worry. If he uses force, he could forget about NATO. Okay, he did use force.
Okay, what I'd like
Where
to do
is the NATO vis-à-vis Georgia
what I'd like to
issue?
do is just for the time being, because I'm sure we can come to the Caucasus, but to pull the conversation back to the broader principles. There are two or three...
But I hope we would also discuss specifics.
Yeah,
not
of course.
Generic issues which are very easy to discuss.
I want to give the audience a sort of chance to put some... I'm going to come back to you in a minute, Javier, okay. after the questions. I'll come back to you first, okay? So we've got this gentleman here.
Thank you very much, and Mr. Solana, thank you very much for staying with us last night for such a long time. I deeply appreciate the fact that you did that. Mr. Minister, it's good to see you. And
you didn't invite me last night.
Well, I've been in Russia when I wasn't invited as well. So, but when you and I first met, I was president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And I enjoyed that exchange and others since that time at ministerials and other times that we've had an opportunity to meet. The one thing that we assured each other was that we would have our discussions with mutual respect. I think the fact that there are so many of us here at this Brussels Forum who are adherents of that notion in dealing with Russia and the European Union and the United States, as well as others in the world. And I think it's time for us to lean forward, look forward, and see how we might go in a positive manner to resolve many of the issues that I think you so very wisely, broadly outlined for us. The question that I have for both of you, to the extent that either of you have any influence in it, when you mention, Mr. Lavrov, OSCE and hard security, as you know, I've spent a lot of time, as have many people in this room, dealing with those three baskets. The trouble that I have, and I ask you your thoughts, is that OSCE operates on consensus. Then it would be, to me, arguably hard for us to suggest that building into the structure something that is automatically glacial, when one party can veto, and that's no accusing fingers to anybody. Don't you think it's time, at least in OSCE, as you move toward thought with reference to other structures, that we revamp the internal structure and move to a methodology that will allow for something to be done? Otherwise, what I find when I go to Vienna is stagnation, and that's problematical.
Can I give Mr. Salam his right of reply?
No, I just want to say...
He wasn't challenged by anyone.
No,
He wanted to challenge
I
you,
just want
I
to
think.
clarify something. When Sergei said why NATO is enlarged. Well, NATO is enlarged, Sergei, because many countries do want to be part of NATO. And they have the right to be part of an alliance that they choose. And since the alliance is not supposed to be against anybody, it's reasonable that they are accepted into the organization. Therefore, one of the principles we have to accept is that countries do have the right to choose the alliance they want to belong to. This is a basic principle, and there are many countries in Europe that they want to be part of the alliance. Others not, but there are many. And if they qualified, and they bring security to the alliance and bring security at the same time to Europe, I think they should be accepted. So this is a principle that I think we should not put into question. And this is part of what we have to agree on if we want to go forward.
Okay.
I hope you remember that you, some years ago, shifted from NATO to the European Union, right?
I never shifted from NATO to the European Union. I was not NATO and I'm not the European Union.
Javier,
I was the Secretary General of NATO
Javier,
and now I'm not.
Javier, absolutely, I agree with you that any country has the sovereign right to choose its partners, to choose its alliances. But when you take Ukraine, I said that public opinion polls indicate that less than 20% of Ukrainians want to become members of NATO. When you speak of Georgia, NATO was recently called a school for democracy. What sort of democracy can start an aggression? Killing hundreds and hundreds of civilians. But I leave it to NATO members, but I certainly want to pick on OSCE problems. Consensus means everyone has a veto. That's the case, except consensus -1 arrangement, which is applied to human rights violations. And I believe this consensus -1 was agreed in Moscow in 1991, just after the putsch and just before the Soviet Union disappeared. And it stays. OSCE needs some revamping, and for 3 or 4 or 5 maybe years, Russia, together with several others, has been promoting negotiations to adopt an OSCE charter. It is called organization. It is not an organization. It doesn't have legal capacity. We have also proposed some documents which, if agreed, would introduce more transparency in how OSCE is doing, including electoral monitoring, including the cooperation with non-governmental organizations, including the appointment of field missions and the mandates of the field missions. We want these field missions to be in line with the existing documents. And we also want to, do something about unacceptable situation with the OSCE budget, when any country can just say, I want to make an extra budgetary contribution for a specific project in country X, and this offer, without going to the Intergovernmental Permanent Council, without going to any intergovernmental organ, immediately gets a status of OSCE project. So anyone can do anything in any country and receive an OSCE umbrella. It's just not right. It creates unnecessary suspicions, and when people don't want to consider those modalities for OSCE to become transparent and clear to everybody, certainly we are thinking that these people just want to use OSCE with its very vague rules and practices for the purposes which are not OSCE endorsed purposes.
Thank you. We've got one here.
I'm still struggling with Mr.
Could everyone, I
Lavrov's-
forgot to say
Sorry.
this, could everyone say their name? And,
Bruce Jackson, Project on Transitional Democracies. Sir, the center of your speech is an argument that we should lock principles of these organizations into contractual law, and we should basically observe the deficiencies of the recent period. It seems to me that we're going to enshrine principles in law. There has to be some observation of modern history and some agreement of what it meant and what principles were based on. If we take this discussion of expansion, and I think Javier got it wrong, suggests that there was a first expansion in 1990. In fact, that was the fourth expansion. The organization has been expanding since its origin 60 years ago. There's been an expansion in every decade. The longest period between expansion has been about 20 years. The shortest period is about 5 years. So if we want to enshrine a principle that observed on an observation of history, it would be that expansion is something we can expect. Similarly, when you suggested that this hasn't conveyed security to say, or a sense of stability to say the Baltic states or Central Europe, an observation of their condition today would suggest that it has. So I'm just struggling. How do we render into law or principle essentially a counter-historical understanding of modern European history?
Yeah, I agree that that making something a law does not mean that security would be ensured, because the law, including international law, including the UN Charter, has been repeatedly violated. But we believe that at least we should try to be honest to each other. And if we agreed to some political commitments, and if these commitments still stay, then we want just to give it a try. And if we all still are committed to those political arrangements, why not making them legally binding, and why not together with NATO, with OSCE, with Collective Security Treaty Organization, with Russian NATO Council, after all, with European Union, of course, to see whether we can develop any mechanisms keeping all organizations intact with their own rules, but mechanisms which would be commonly acceptable and commonly applied. We don't have an answer how this might work and whether it would work at all, but we believe that this is worth a try. And we invite all, and I agree with Javier, speaking about a treaty today is premature. What we want is to discuss the substance of these problems and try to see whether people would be really interested in making sure that everyone is comfortable. Javier did recognize that, I mean, most Europeans are comfortable, the Americans are comfortable, but the third pillar, as you called us, of European security, Russia is not. It's an invitation to a dialogue like this, and I would really welcome a phase of these discussions, maybe later down the road, when we have satisfied questions and start entertaining some constructive ideas. There is a hope that this would happen. We have already encouraged some think tanks in Russia, in Germany, and in France, and they are working together, arranging for a series of conferences where they would be introducing ideas. In any case, if you want, we just want a second opinion on everything. Missile defense, Istanbul commitments linked with the CFE, NATO expansion as the expansion of democratic space and security. We just want a second opinion.
Okay. What I'd like to do is to, as the Foreign Minister suggested, to sort of move the conversation on a little to some of the issues, whether it's missile defense, whether it's cooperation on non-proliferation, like Iran, whether it's Afghanistan, energy security. I think I've seen about 9 people who would like to comment or ask questions. So what I'm going to try and do is take sort of clusters of 2 or 3. Actually, that's 10, 11 people now. I'm going to take one in the front first, and then one, this gentleman at the back there. No, behind you.
Thank Thank you. Heather Graby, Open Society Institute, Brussels. Minister Lavrov, what's your level of ambition for these new security arrangements? Are they really about Russia having a right of veto on hard security arrangements on the continent of Europe, what you referred to as the second opinion, or could they really be used to forge a common position between NATO and Russia in terms of common external threats outside Europe? For example, non-proliferation with regard to Iran, also North Korea. How would that work? Is it really about just arrangements here, or is it actually about the outside world?
No to the,
can we take
no to the first question, yes to the second one, but not only on Iran and North Korea, about our own feeling of security. Yes, to forge a common position.
Okay.
I just said that we don't have any recipes.
We can come
an honest
back,
discussion.
I want to get people
I make your life
involved.
easier, saving some time.
This gentleman here. We got a mic here. And then the gentleman right in front of him. And then we'll take those three.
My name is John Kornblum. I'm a former American diplomat and participated in just about every single one of these discussions that took place in the 1990s. I agree with Mr. Stevens. We should forget that, basically. That's history. The interesting point which Mr. Lavrov made was we need to be honest with each other. And I think that virtually everyone who has dealt with Russia in security affairs often asks the questions, is Russia honest with itself? The fact is, you said, everybody in Europe is happy except Russia. Now, if I were honest with myself when I looked at that situation, I would say, why are we on the outside? Russia's tendency has always been to blame others for this. And your desire to essentially turn over existing security arrangements is, in a way, saying it's you who have to change, not us. I think you have many reasons to be unhappy, honest reasons, with the last 8 years. I don't think American diplomacy was very skillful. I think many of the events were not handled very well. But at the same time, to now come to us and say we have to change all of our arrangements because you're not happy with the situation is at a minimum not very tactically intelligent. I think what we need, I think we do need a new series of discussions, but not about changing security arrangements. We need a new series of discussions to make sure that we can help Russia integrate into the modern world. We're in the middle of an economic crisis right now, which is hurting Russia very badly. But in the end, Russia's security is not going to be determined by whether NATO is on its borders. It's going to be determined whether Russia can integrate into the modern, globalized technological world. There you're having more difficulties than you are with the security arrangements. And I would suggest what we need is a very large, probably coordinated among nations, series of discussions with Russia about how it in fact becomes a modern globalized country. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a good article.
A final
Editorial.
a final
Thank
one
you for
here.
your editorial, Mr. Kornblum.
A final one here, and then I'm going to come back to both of you.
Yes, my name is Tomohiko Taniguchi, formerly with Japanese Foreign Ministry, now an academic. You have been opposed to U.S.-Japan ballistic missile defense. Are you still, given the challenge posed by North Korea, obviously? Secondly, Russia is both an European and Asian entity. It seems that you're still having difficulties to cut a good balance between the two. When it comes to the challenges and opportunities in Siberia, in the eastern part of Russia, what are they?
Okay, so we've got three. I'm going to give Mr. Solana first go.
Javier, can you cover the last one now, please, for me?
with a little bit of difficulty, but I will try. I will try, Sergei. Now, I'd like to be a little bit more pragmatic and see how we can move to try to meet the concerns that the Russian Federation does have, and at the same time do not complicate too much the structure that we have today. I think the manner to move on and to do it rapidly is by adapting to the new realities the NATO-Russia Council. You said, Sergei, that it started with a situation in which Russia was outside. It was NATO plus Russia, not NATO and Russia in the debates. That is true. But as you know, that would change. The structure of the NATO-Russia Council today is everybody on the same footing. So I think that we have room there to move on. I think this is the wish of the members of the alliance, And I hope very much it's the wish of the Russian Federation. So we have, on the big concern that you have, the most important concern that you have, as expressed to you, which is in the hard security basket, I think a lot can be done with the structures we have today if we use them properly. And I really hope that that will be the case in the coming period of time. That is the most important thing that we have. Now, Sergei, you have to understand also the concerns that exist among member states of the European Union, the United States of America also, and what has happened in the last part of the year 2008 and the beginning of 2009. 2008 has a big problem during the summer that will continue after the summer. And then at the beginning of the year we had a big problem also on energy that has to do also with our relationship. I think these issues have to be tackled and not only go to solve the biggest structures, but at the same time try to tackle the problems that we have in front of us every day. If we have problems with trust, with confidence, the best manner to recuperate that trust, to recuperate that confidence, is to begin solving some of the problems that we have in our everyday life. Now, last thing I would like to say is that Russia and the European Union, Russia, the European Union and NATO have a lot of things to do in the world together. I think it's little that cannot be done, or can be done, without the cooperation of Russia, and probably nothing that can be done against Russia. And we have an enormous amount of problems in the world of today. Stephen has mentioned something that we cannot escape today from facing it, which is Iran. And the cooperation between us and Iran is fundamental. Russia and the Europeans, Russia and the Americans together, we have to really face the problem of Iran in a coordinated fashion. This is one of the most important challenges we have in front of us. If we can get that, we will get a tremendous amount of work done to construct a good relationship between the three pillars that at the end of the day are the basis for the European security.
Mr. Lavrov, I wonder whether you could answer the question there about we have to change rather than you.
On forgetting history, as you suggested, and Mr. Kornblum supported you strongly, if it is about forgetting the basis on which Russia-NATO cooperation is founded, then it's some honest discussion, I would say. So I hope that this is not an invitation to forget everything which we committed ourselves to. And I already quoted some examples when these commitments were not delivered on the other side of Russia-NATO Council. Number two, we are not perfect. Nobody is perfect, as the line goes from the famous movie. And I hope that this is also realized by everyone, including our American partners. And the message which President Obama sent yesterday to the Iranian people and government, I believe, is an example how people should be self-critical, including the people at the very top. And this is an example to follow. On missile defense, we are in general in favor of joint cooperation on an equal basis. But when we are told that this particular issue, a threat from the south, to Europe and to the United States, as the line goes, that this particular threat can only be challenged, can only be countered by this particular answer, by this particular response. And when we try to provide our own analysis, giving alternatives, and we are told, well, maybe we can use this as well, but this is the major part of the system. Even in the United States, there are the Budget Office of Congress circulated a report which has at least 3 alternatives to the third positioning area in Poland and the Czech Republic. The scientists in the United States speak about using drones to counter the threat of missile attack in Middle Asia, Western Asia, and in the Eastern Asia. Yeah, we are ready to cooperate on those threats. We don't take them easily, but we want to cooperate on an honest basis, where no one, by definition and, ex officio, has any intellectual priority. Let's think together. On Siberia and the Far East, yes, we are going to enhance our investment in those areas. We welcome foreign investments, including from Japan, South Korea. We are discussing specific projects and business is coming. Javier, on August 2008, you said you were concerned. We were outraged. It was a blatant aggression against the international commitments of Georgia, to which President Saakashvili subscribed, and he was giving orders to kill peacekeepers and civilians. So I can agree that it was an absolutely unacceptable behavior, and I hope, by the way, we want to agree once again in what we propose for discussion on European security, to reiterate in a legally binding document that no one should use force to resolve conflicts under international consideration. And lastly, on your concern with the gas crisis, well, I hope you also talk to the transit countries. 2 years ago, when this happened for the first time, you, Brussels, suggested to us to develop an early warning mechanism. We said, fine, yes, but let's include in this early warning mechanism the transit countries. There was no reaction from Brussels, and there is still none. I don't know how this was discussed and why we lost all this time and did not develop this early warning thing with the producer, consumers, and the transit countries. By the way, if you look to the east of Russia, we sell hydrocarbons to China. Now we are selling liquefied gas to Japan. There are many customers, and there never was an interruption. So can you think of why this is happening? Why it's only in the western direction that we have an interruption every now and then? We are prepared to discuss this openly. We think we reached with our Ukrainian colleagues a fair deal, which was welcomed by Europe, which was helped to be negotiated by Europeans, and let's stick to these deals, and let's just make sure that everyone is involved in this early warning and hopefully in functioning of this smoothly.
I'm going to take two questions in the row there. The gentleman first.
Thank you very much. My name is Matyas Sörsi from Hungary. Mr. Lavrov, notwithstanding the fact that European Union is still investigating who started the war, it is a fact that today there are Russian troops occupying territory of Georgia. But this leads me to a question also to Mr. Solana, who said that Europe is happy with the security arrangement. Now I start to be embarrassed, what is Europe? Because I can tell you Georgia is very unhappy with the current security arrangement. My question is that who can decide for Georgia, for example, whether it should be happy or unhappy, because currently part of territory is occupied and they see no support from anybody. And I think it's important for all of us to know that Georgia is part of Europe. Are we really happy?
And the lady joining, and then I want to take one at the back, right at the back there.
Thank you very much. Vesna Pusic of Croatia. Why countries wanted to join NATO? They wanted to join NATO to increase their stability and security. However, some of them discovered that their attempt or thinking about joining NATO actually decreased their security and stability, and it primarily had to do with timing and geography. So who thought of it or had the possibility to do it earlier, it actually increased their security. The later ones obviously ran a huge risk. Georgia is an example. In some ways, it seems to me that we have actually forgotten the role of the European Union in this whole discussion. Obviously, European Union and Russia share a very important neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, it's turned out that the idea of joining NATO in the recent years, not in the early stage, but in the recent years, became a non-option. However, there might be, or it decreased their security, so it might be a solution to actually look at that neighborhood that includes both Russian and EU interests and find a third policy or a new approach for that specific neighborhood area.
Thank you. And the gentleman at the back there.
One question to Mr. Lavrov. I'm Thomas Simolaritas, French citizen living in Ukraine. The main characteristic of the Russian diplomacy can be summarized in one word. It's fear. Russia fears the West, Western investors, Western NGOs, Western democracy, if we're talking about Ukraine and Georgia, and NATO as well. And on the other hand, it seems like Russia is creating fear in the heart of its neighbors. And most of the countries around Russia fear really Russia. And that has been driving the fact that they joined NATO to protect themselves. The contrast between the US president and the Russian prime minister is fascinating. One is inspiring, the other seems to be threatening the others. So my question is there any chance for Russia to change its policy and to stop threatening the others, but to try to inspire the others? Because the current policy is not helping Russia. Could Russia try to seduce its neighbors instead of threatening them? You even managed to antagonize Belarus, which is quite an achievement.
On this one, the answer is very easy. I hope, since you are both very interested in how to change Russia, I think you can usefully discuss it with Mr. Kornblum, and I would be waiting for the outcome of this discussion.
We've got, do answer. Actually, Mr. Solana first. We've got a couple of questions there, and whatever you would like.
To tell you the truth, the second I didn't quite understood what you wanted to say.
I think it was was the EU an alternative to NATO for some of these states?
That is the case. Well, as you know, the period of time we are talking about, which is not history, is present, the European Union has enlarged to a good number of countries. Well, we are 27, and I think that's contributed to the stability of Europe. No doubt about that. At the same time, NATO has enlarged, and I think has contributed also to the stability of our continent. Now, I'd like to say that not everybody has been enlarged. Not every country that has expressed their wishes to be part of the European Union or be part of NATO has been accepted to be part of the European Union of NATO. And I like to see that there are two conditions there that are key. One, to be part of an enlarged organization, being the European Union or being NATO, it has to contribute to the better being of that organization. No doubt about that. And the second has to be that by enlarging that organization, the whole of the European continent becomes more stable, or more potentially more prosperous, or potentially more secure. These are the two parameters that has to be looked when you go to enlarge an organization, being the European Union, or being NATO. I can speak on the European Union now. I spoke on NATO some time back. On the European Union, as you know, there is perspective for membership to the European Union of many countries that they know it already. Some of them have already a structural relationship with the European Union through the association and stabilization agreements, the countries of the Balkans that you have mentioned, and other countries have another kind of arrangement. The Eastern Partnership is something we are putting in place to give a chance to relationship with the European Union of the countries to the eastern part of Europe. And that is what we're trying to continue doing. And with that, we think we stabilize Europe, we give a possibility to Europe to be developed and to move into prosperity and help the countries to be more prosperous and more stable.
You know, seriously speaking, I believe, if you want to make a funny point, and to be happy with yourself, you have the right to do so. I want Russia to be understood. It's not about, Russian foreign policy is not about fear. It's about fairness. That's what we want. And when we, every now and then, see unfairness in dealing with our partners, when promises are being broken, commitments are not delivered, we have concerns. And what I would also say, following up on what Javier said now, yeah, between Russia and European Union, Russia and NATO, we have documents on which we base our relationship. And those are very valuable relationships. With the EU, we have the 4 common spaces and the 4 road maps to build those 4 common spaces. And we stated in that very important document that integration processes in post-Soviet space and in the European Union should be compatible. They should not be mutually exclusive. They should be mutually supportive. And Javier mentioned Eastern Partnership. we are accused of trying to have spheres of influence. What is Eastern Partnership? Is it a sphere of influence, including Belarus, which you care so much about? We would like to understand. And when my good friend Karel Schwarzenberg publicly says that if Belarus recognizes Abkhazia and South Ossetia, it could forget about Eastern Partnership, is it threatening? Is it blackmail? Or is it democracy at work? And apart from Karel, my another good friend, Benito Ferrero-Waldner, said the same. So we were told originally that Eastern Partnership is about cooperation, including with Russian participation at some part. And then after those type of statements, we have questions. Is it about pulling countries from the positions which they are supposed to take freely? One more thing. Russia, NATO, Afghanistan, mutual interest. Our ambassador, who is in this room, has been trying for the last month to agree that a format which NATO uses to discuss Afghanistan with Central Asian countries could also admit Russia. I don't know whether you succeeded or not, but it took him a lot, just to make the point. If you want us to cooperate on Afghanistan, why do you talk to us separately, to Central Asia separately? Why don't we talk NATO vis-à-vis Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is very active in intercepting drug caravans from Afghanistan? We have been knocking on NATO door with this one for 5 years.
Okay, fine.
So
it's like we've got 8 minutes left, I've just been told. So, and I've seen there are some people I'm not going to be able to call. I'm really sorry, but I've seen 3. But I got a call. But could you keep your questions, comments really brief, because I want both Mr. Solana and the Minister to have a bit of time to sum up. So 1 here, and there were 2 here. Okay.
I'm Charles Grant from the Centre for European Reform. I wanted to follow up Mr. Lavrov's comment a second ago about the Eastern Partnership, because Russian leaders have talked about privileged relations with the countries in their neighbourhood, and it's not clear to me whether or not those privileged relations should exclude closer links between the countries concerned in the EU. I've just come back from Belarus, and in Belarus I found that the leadership there are very keen to reposition their country to be closer to the EU, less close to Russia in some ways. Does this bother you? And could you, if the Eastern Partnership really bothers you as a concept, could you explain why?
Just here.
I just did.
I'm just going to take them all. It's this lady here. And then the lady behind, and then that's going to be it.
National Security Advisor of Georgia, Kat Khashalashvili. And I've been restraining myself, being commenting too much around the conversation, but then very short comment. I don't even know if I can have a question in this regard. What can I ask as of now the representative of Russia in this case? But then a comment. Basically, we spoke about the honesty as well here, and then I think that's a very important point. When we speak about new engagement with Russia, resetting button that or the just conversations, as we call it for today's debate, we have to have a clarity of the mind, what this engagement entails, basically. So what are the concerns that Russia might be having in that case, and then we have to deal with them, and then what they are, basically. On the one side, we have imaginary threats coming from NATO, as much as Russia perceives that. Organization which comprises democracies as members of it, and then standards which just entail commonly shared values for all of us sitting over here. And then, on the other hand, we have perceptions, actions at the same time that can be perceived from Russia. So that what is this country that has the affairs of the type that it has with regard to NATO? This is the country which is still at unease of not having the world which is divided in blocks, and then it's not seeing modern relationship of states as individual relationships of states as well, with which sovereign choices of sovereign nations can be respected in that way, which is still at unease of having that independence being exercised in its own neighborhood in all ways. All different ways of them, and which is still, violating the very basic fundamental principles of international law that it, on surface, hypocritically I would say, is maintaining that much in the speeches. and rhetorics. So we're still in the situation in which this country occupies 20% of a sovereign country, a neighboring country, which is still at unease of implementing ceasefire agreement, which is legally binding and is signed by that country. And I didn't want to be very specific in details about something that concerned my country, but then I think that is fair to generalize out of that as well, what we can expect out of this engagement and how to deal with the concerns that Russia might be having. And I'm sorry if
Very strong
I'll be
point,
more
but
emotional maybe in my intervention.
Right. Thank you. I'm afraid we don't have time for a last question, except I'm going to slightly abuse my own position and pose to both of them a last question, which is a very simple one. And it's really actually perhaps for Mr. Lavrov, but how important is it for Russia that Iran doesn't get nuclear weapons? And what should Russia be doing, and what should Europe, the United States be doing to ensure, beyond the rhetoric we've seen from Mr. Obama this week, to ensure that doesn't happen? What can Russia contribute to that, if indeed you see it as a bigger threat as we do? But more generally, we've got sort of 2 or 3 minutes each. Just answer questions you like and make a final closing comment. I think we've got some answers, but some more questions too. Have you?
To close? Now, I'll have to consider some of the things I've said already. But for me, engagement with Russia is fundamental. And I think we have in the foreseeable future the possibility to get engaged with Russia and try to resolve some of the problems that we have. I think the last period of time has been some difference between perceptions by Russia and what we understood were the realities. I think making an effort to understand the other and understand the perception of the other, I think is fundamental. That effort has to be done, and I hope we will do it. I think it's possible to make progress in the short term. And the main concern that Russia has today, which is hard security, as I said before, by working in a more effective manner in the NATO-Russia Council. I think there's room for improvement there, and I think this is in the interest of everybody to use it and use it properly. Second, I'd like to say that with Russia we have not only a problem of neighborhood, but a problem to deal with Russia on strategic issues. Sometimes, and I'd like to say that, it's easier to deal with Russia on strategic issues than to be a neighbor. And that is a reality. Sometimes it's easier to deal with questions which are far away from our neighborhood, and some more difficult to deal with things which are related to our neighborhood. But in any case, on the strategic issues, I think that there are 2 which are fundamental, or 3. One is disarmament, and I think this is going to be object of engagement also with the United States, following the meeting that took place the other day in Geneva. Second, we have to deal with issues related to the Middle East at large, and there Iran is a fundamental issue. And I hope very much that we can construct a solid relationship between Russia, the United States, and the European Union to tackle constructively the problem of Iran and Iran. The other day, yesterday, was an important step in the right direction, but I think that Russia also has to adapt up to that very important problem that will be without any doubt in our very high up in our agenda in the year 2009. That's what I would like to see taking place in the year 2009. It's an important year, and I hope that we will be able to strike a better relationship between the 3 pillars that construct the European security: the United States, the European Union, and the Russian Federation.
I will address 3 comments which were made. On the privileged relationship, we have repeatedly explained that we cannot consider countries with whom we have hundreds and hundreds of years of history together as something not important to us. By the same token, Russia is a privileged territory for them. They have millions of their migrant workers earning their salaries in Russia and helping their families. The linkages among us are so numerous that it's impossible to ignore it. And I hope this is understood. We are not against any one of our neighbors to have good relations with the European Union, to have projects and programs with the European Union. We have been talking to the EU for the last several years, explaining to them that isolating Belarus is a mistake. We have been talking to Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, where Belarus was suspended in its status of invited guest. To rectify this situation, we were promoting contacts between Belarus and European structures. So we have nothing against this. On the contrary, we would benefit if we all stick to the principle between Russia and the European Union that we don't play games in this neighborhood, that we don't put these countries in front of a wrong choice. Either you're with us or you're against us. Several years ago, there were voices from one of the European capitals close by saying exactly this, that these countries must decide who are they with. We don't want situations when some of our Western friends traveling in Central Asia and being received by presidents and telling them, you either, you have to choose, you either going to be a colony of Russia or you will be part of the free world. This is unacceptable. This is the game which is absolutely ignores the sovereign rights of these countries, which does not show any respect to these countries. So the answer is yes, we want to do it together, we want to do it openly, we understand the interest of the European Union and the United States in the Caucasus and in Central Asia. It's about hydrocarbons, it's about transit routes, it's about fighting terrorism and the WMD proliferation. So we understand the interest, but we want this interest to be promoted by understandable and transparent means, not by some under the carpet whispering into their ears. Ekot Tkachelaşvili, I understand your emotions. I only can say that I hope Georgian people would have leaders who really would be guided by the interests of Georgian people, who would not give orders to kill people whom they themselves declared to be their citizens, and who would know how to respect their neighbors and to live in peace with everybody. And on Iran, no, I mean the South Ossetia. Okay, then Russian citizens could be killed. On Iran, I would only say that what Javier said, I agree. What to do to make sure that Iran doesn't have a nuclear bomb? First of all, there is no proof that Iran even has decided to make a nuclear bomb. As long as IAEA works in Iran, IAEA monitors all these centrifuges which are producing low enriched uranium for the fuel purposes. To change it to the weapon-grade uranium, you need to do manipulations which would be immediately noticed by IAEA cameras, or if cameras are switched off, we would also know that something took place which is wrong. It's negotiations, it's respect, and it's engagement of Iran in all the areas which we have indicated in the 3+3 paper offered to Iran, including security dialogue, not only on Iraq on an ad hoc basis, but security dialogue with Iran on all the issues in the Middle East. Palestine, Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon. Iran must be engaged as a constructive part of the solution, not as part of the problem.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lavrov. Well, it's been, I think, everyone will agree, a fascinating conversation, and I wonder if you join me in thanking Mr. Lavrov and Mr. Solana.
Thank you, Paul. That was a really great session. We very much appreciate it. We're going to take a 20-minute break, and then we'll be back talking about economics.